I've been a long time listener and first time caller to this conference, and the past day and a half have just been amazing. My brain is exploding and imploding in all kinds of wonderful ways. So we've been focusing mostly in this conference, I think, about making digital things. And my area of expertise is actually making physical objects. So I am infinitely fascinated with the process of making things and what that means. So in the next 18 minutes or so, what I'm hoping to do is impart some of that love to you and tell you the opportunities we see for games to help with the enormous changes underfoot in supply chain. So if I could get my first slide, that would be great. For better or worse, this is what the inside of my brain looks like, although my brain is probably less organized than this. If I think about the words that my staff and I use most through a given week, automation is going to be up there. And with the people that we hang with, they kind of fall into a couple different tribes. And I'm interested maybe in the chats. We could do this with poll or just organically. Where you guys feel you fit in this equation. So we have the autophobics, and these are very wonderful people who are just super worried about automation and the job loss that will come from it. We have the autophilics, who are people who are typically in technology firms, and they say, we want the bad jobs to go away. There's already technology out there. We should automate as much as possible. And then we have a group of folks that I feel like myself and my team fit in called the auto realists. And we really want, the future of work to be fair. We want there to be decent jobs. We don't want people to be put into positions that are unsafe. But we want to look at the data and say, similar to what Nicole Bradford's comments were yesterday, how is that netting out the future of work in terms of fairness and inclusivity? And is there an opportunity for us to intervene? So I'm curious to see from you guys where you stand. So prior to working in apparel, I worked in car factories just like this one, in furniture. And I got really interested in how different apparel factories look. So if we can go to my next slide, what you may or may not know is that this is what apparel factories look like. So just like trip on that for a second. Every single stitch on every piece of clothing that you're wearing, that's in your closet, that's in, the couch in your apartment, was done by a person pushing cloth through a sewing machine. So it's an enormous human labor pool that goes into making our clothes. And if we, think about COVID and the disruptions that have happened because of this pandemic and the supply chain, what's happening is that a situation like this is not going to fly anymore. Do you see social distancing in this factory? No. So unfortunately, the pandemic is accelerating the use of automation in this sector and already contributing to some job loss. So let's take an example of it. If we can go to the next slide. I used jeans before because most people were wearing them, but now most of us are not even wearing pants. But if you remember your jeans, this is what they look like. And it's very probable that 100 people probably worked on your jeans throughout the supply chain. And if we could go to the next slide, what's happening is not automation like I showed you in that first slide with big industrial robots all working together in a factory that doesn't have any lights on. It's more creeping automation. So you might have a new sewing machine that has an automatic thread cutting to it. You might have a laser that's cutting out the pieces of cloth from a large bolt of fabric instead of somebody doing that manually. And if we can go to the next slide, this is what that looks like in terms of job displacement. When the image comes up, you'll see that you might have, out of a department of 109, 110 workers, 80 of those people removed by automation. So it's significant. There's no way to even make that point even more clear. This is a major change that's happening in the sector. And if we can go to the next slide, that creeping automation is beginning to be usurped by more autonomous automation, which is like those industrial robots. So this is a sewing robot that will projected to remove about 60 to 80% of jobs in the sector. And the industry is targeting that this change is going to happen in about 10 years. So we've got our work cut out for us. And if you go to the next slide, that population of folks is about 62 million people. And I spend, well, before when we could go places outside our apartments, I spent a lot of time in Bangladesh. And this is a picture of Bangladeshi workers going to the factory in the morning. And, you know, if you or I, probably lots of people we know have lost their jobs due to the pandemic, it first takes a lot of courage, right? To say, I have all of this experience and expertise in this particular industry, and now I've got to move into doing something different. But we're lucky in the US and in Europe and parts of Asia to have other opportunities to go to. But if you look at a garment producing country like Bangladesh, 80% of their exports are clothes. So there aren't a whole lot of other options for people to jump to in the same way that we might be able to. All right. So I feel like I've impressed to you the picture of what is happening and the job losses in the sector. So let's flip it now, if we can go to the next slide, and look at what is growing in the apparel sector. So I'm sure that there are many of you out there who are amazing 3D modelers and who are building incredible costumes for characters in games. And in the apparel sector, they want to be as good as you are doing that kind of stuff, but they're just starting. And the drivers for them doing that work is because they want to make something accurately, they want to test it. Like, let's say you have a fantastic new sustainable material that you want to make jogging pants in. Well, you've got to do a digital simulation to find out whether that material is actually going to hold up or whether it's going to disintegrate while you're running, which would be very embarrassing. They're also interested in using digital models for selling. So, you know, none of us are cruising around in stores right now at all. And we're going to see more and more e-commerce experiences that are utilizing digital models. And then lastly, I think we all want clothing that fits us properly, right? And a way to do that, as body scanning and body sensing data is coming in, is to utilize 3D models. So there is a need in the industry for more people who know how to build digital models. And on top of that, there is just a need in general for most workers to have a level of digital literacy and familiarity with digital models. You know, to tell a robot what to do in a garment factory, you have to look at a digital model and utilize that digital model to communicate what you want to happen. So it's a really, really important building block for the future of work and the future of jobs in this industry. So if we could please go to the next slide. We then said, all right, so we have this large population of folks on one side who will be out of work soon. We have this other population that isn't as big as it needs to be. What's in common with this population? And it really boiled down to an understanding of clothing construction. So really getting what stitches are and how seams are constructed and identifying pattern shapes and symbols. So we use that as the basis of our design intervention. Be like, you know, how do we ensure an approach to automation that really protects workers? And okay, great, that's coming up now. And beyond this, there were also really concerning trends within this shift. So if we can go to the next slide, there's also a significant gender aspect to this. So within this change that's happening within workers being displaced in this industry, female workers are being left behind at greater rates. This is because there are stupid cultural norms that say that women are not as capable as men in doing jobs that have a technical component. I'm sure no one on this call has ever had that said or inferred to them. And we just have less instances where women have enthusiastically raised their hands for technical training. So with all of that in our minds, we got to designing and prototyping. And if we can go to the next slide, I wanted to show you our first group of piloters in Bangladesh. But before we even met these women, because we're in New York City, we're lucky enough to live near a neighborhood called Jackson Heights in Queens, and that has a large South Asian population. So we prototyped in 2 instances with groups of women who were new immigrants to the US who had worked in garment factories. And it was great that we were able to fail cross town before we took, a 29-hour flight over to Bangladesh to work with these women. And I want to tell you a little bit more about them. If we can go to the next slide. These women are typically in their 20s. They've typically worked in the garment sector their whole lives. Many of them have not had any formal education after the 4th grade. Some cannot even read or write. And many have never used a computer or smartphone or even an ATM before. So you can see the level of technical sophistication in the handsets that they're using. Now, if our job then is to build a technical training in CAD and really heavy tech with folks who've never even used a computer before, that is a significant design challenge. But we are luckily up for the challenge. And if we can go to the next slide, we said, all right, how can we make this thing compelling? Because of those of you who have worked in 3D modeling know that, like, a technical training in CAD is not typically a wonderful, compelling experience. Most technical trainings are worksheets and endless PowerPoint presentations. So how can we make this fun and exciting? How can we make it approachable? So is accessibility an aspect that we can build in so that this isn't such a scary experience? And then lastly, we can build a cool piece of tech, but how do we really scale this? And we need a business model in place so that we're building something valuable. While that value may be incremental and build over time, we're building something that's helping the industry, and there's a very clear return on investment in what we're doing beyond the social impact that we want to achieve in making sure the future of work is fair. So if we can go to the next slide. We thought that games were a really exciting way to achieve this. So the picture that's on the right is in a jeans factory, and the signs and the symbols you're going to see in a jeans factory are, some cases, quite shameful. Like that green dot that you see above that sewing station is telling a supervisor whether that worker is producing at the rate that they need to, if there's a problem with the machine or it's idle. So there's very symbols that are showing what you're doing well, what you're not when you're failing. And we know that the stakes are much lower inside a game. You can fail and it's not a big deal. In a garment factory, you're failing and it's having an impact directly to your income. We also know that workers don't rest as often as they should because, again, they're being graded on how many pieces they're pushing through. So games are an exciting way, just like you see in Animal Farm there, to change a mindset and reward rest. So if we can go to the next slide. This is the version of the software we've been using. So we utilize Microsoft Cognitive Services. We've been training in AI for a while in Bangla and Indonesian Bahasa, so that workers who are unable to read or write can interact with the interface. We utilize touchscreen because many of the workers were scared that they'd break a keyboard. These are some of the glimpses you'll see from the pilots that we did in New York City and in Bangladesh and Indonesia. And again, this is in many cases the first time these workers have used a computer or tablet. And I think this community understands this, but we take for granted so many of our gestures and tapping and dragging. We just do them instinctually. And it's very humbling to see somebody who doesn't know how hard to press and helping them figure that stuff out. So this has been the first version of the software, and we're building some exciting new features now. If we can go to the next slide. How does this look in terms of impact? So a lot of people say to me, great, Sarah, you are training workers to, into jobs that are not going to exist. And, similar to Nicole's comments yesterday, the future of work is dynamic. None of us are going to be able to skill to a certain level and just be like, okay, cool, I'm here for a while. We're constantly going to need to upskill and reskill. So finding ways to do that with implicit learning, with technical trainings that are more bite-sized and fit into people's lives, I think, as we've heard over and over again in these presentations, is the way to do it. So in our circumstance, the workers that I showed you before in Dhaka are now multi-machine operators. So they're making more money and they are safe from a round of layoffs. Because of COVID, because of the social distancing needed in factories, the factories are hiring fewer workers back. So we're glad that we've helped them achieve this next level, and their jobs are safe for the time being. But over time, we want to, if they're interested, increase their digital skills and help them as factories change and begin to bring in more 3D technology and more automation technology. And then over time, we want to see them leave and start their own companies and move into other sectors as the industry becomes more cost effective and diversifies. So if we can go to the next slide. You might be saying, well, oh, that's great. You're incrementally helping these people. And what does that actually translate to in terms of systemic change? So I like to think about impact in terms of range of motion and also security in housing. So a worker right now is making about $140 a month in Bangladesh. Bringing them technical skills that gets them to a point where they're doing robotics is going to add $100 a month. That's going to allow them to go on buses and just have a broader range of motion. Moving them into a digital modeler job is going to allow them to have a motorbike or a vehicle in the home, and is going to allow them to meet other workers, potentially learn from other workers, organize and raise labor rights over time. The same is true in housing. So you might have a very, very rudimentary kitchen that a worker has right now, but over time that income would allow the family to have more stable housing and more room to enjoy their apartments, as we all are. Next slide. So our team is based in New York City in Dhaka, and we're always on the lookout of collaborators who maybe want to have a conversation, maybe something in the work that we've done is something that you've thought about or wrestled with in your projects. We always want to learn, because the more we share with each other, the faster we all learn. And we're always on the lookout in bringing more excited autorealists to the team. So if we go to the last slide, please. This is how you get at me once it comes up. Our website is shimmy.io. We tweet and on Instagram at everybody Shimmy or Sarah Krasley. So thank you so much. I hope this was interesting. I hope that, if nothing else, it allowed you to appreciate your clothes a little bit more, and how much work goes into them by people and machines, and how hopefully we can intervene and make sure that the future of work is fair. So I am going to scoot over into the impact room for a Q&A, and I hope to chat more with you guys about that there. Thank you so much for having me.